Hello and welcome back to the Cheltenham Festival 2021 head-to-head series with me and Dan. Dan, how are you doing?
I'm good, mate. Thank you. Other than the national hunt meetings in England and Ireland all being cancelled at the moment, yeah, not too bad. It's a big week for our earlier Ante-post bets as well, I believe.
We do. We have a fair few running this weekend, and that should hopefully, if they all shorten, we'll be in a good spot going into Cheltenham, if they all run well, that is. We'll start off with some questions from you guys. The first one comes from Ian Pollard, who on Twitter, he said, he would like to know our thoughts on Royal Pagaille. So, Dan, if you want to take it away on your thoughts of a pretty impressive performance this weekend.
Yeah, massively. It's an interesting one, really. It's kind of put the cat amongst the pigeons for the Gold Cup and the National Hunt chase markets. They've reacted quite drastically to that performance, really, given I think he's now rated 166. But yeah, there's a lot to like about it. He just does what he has to do. He travelled very comfortably. He looked like a graded horse in a handicap and went and bolted up. So options are open. I'd love to see him in a Gold Cup just because he adds a completely different element to it. Obviously, you have a lot of graded form going in, and a lot of these would have raced against each other in the past. But he's a completely fresh newcomer to that division. So it'd be fascinating to see how he would get on in a Gold Cup.
There's plenty of positives you can take from the run, but I thought I'd take the pessimistic view on Royal Pagaille. The first one that I'd have an issue with is he's only ever been ran on soft or heavy ground. Now, it's not so much of an issue because we are likely to get soft ground come Cheltenham. But if we were to have a dry patch between now and the festival, the ground is an unknown. Also, since showing his true colours, he's only won at Haydock and Kempton. He's only ran at Haydock and Kempton, actually. So flatter tracks must probably do suit him, and Cheltenham will be a completely different test. He also jumps quite flat. We were just speaking prior to recording this about these French bred horses. They jump really flat, and maybe a really jumps testing track like Cheltenham might not suit. On the other hand, we have a horse who 3 months ago we simply didn't know anything about and has burst onto the scene. He's now one of the market favourites for the Gold Cup and possibly stuck up the best 3-mile performance we've seen this season. Would you have any doubts about him at all, Dan?
I mean, yeah, he's only run on testing ground, but that's all he's encountered so far. So I wouldn't be too downbeat about him encountering a sounder surface just yet. It's an unknown, but it's not like he hasn't handled it yet. I don't see Cheltenham necessarily being too much of an issue. I think Lord de Menil struck me as a similar one last season, who was running on similar kind of races before going to Cheltenham, and he handled it fine. He seems quite straightforward, and his jumping's more efficient. Like, it isn't too Fanny and Destraval like, where he literally rifles over them really flat. Like, he doesn't get massively high, but that's the kind of jumping you want in a staying chaser, just kind of efficient. He does what he needs to do. So I wouldn't be as downbeat as you are. I think he's just a really fascinating horse at this stage, isn't he? Like, there's plenty of options for him. I mean, if you were probably picking the ideal race at this stage and there was no other horses to consider, you'd probably just go for the RSA and then back for the Gold Cup next year, wouldn't you? But Monkfish for the Richies throws that plan kind of into disarray a bit. But we'll see. He's an interesting one, that's for sure.
It will definitely be interesting to see how that plays out over the next few weeks, because the National Hunt chase looks like the easier option, but obviously Rich Ritchie doesn't have a runner in that Gold Cup, and this horse definitely looks to have the class to compete. The next question was sent to Dan, and this was about Jerry's Back's eye-catching run this weekend. I'm not so sure on what route they're planning on taking, whether that be the Ultima or the Kim Muir. You imagine he'd be right at the top of the weights for the Kim Muir. Dicky, he swung the bend of a double handful. This horse had 400 days off the track, and he looked to have an easy time after things from that point onwards. The Kim Muir is obviously your favourite race, so I'll let you speak about this one.
It's a shame Cocoa Beach wins it, though, isn't it? So it's
tell JP.
Well, no, he'll have something in it. You can bet on that. Yeah, it was an interesting run. I think Philip Hobbs did some videos before that race and described him as quite a gross horse who can often take a couple of runs to come to hand, but he hasn't been massively over raced in recent seasons, and he hit 1.7 in running the weekend. As you say, he looked to have a fair bit left, despite probably never really getting to within 5 lengths of Dashwell Drasher in the end. He's an interesting one. I think he's been quite found in the markets now. I think he's 14 to 1-ish for the Kim Muir and the Ultima. 142, so I think you'd probably maybe be more inclined to go for the Kim Muir. We know how JP generally likes that race quite a lot. His Cheltenham form doesn't inspire, though, if you're looking at Festival Handicap for him. I mean, he was beaten 50 lengths in the Novice Chase, and he was a grueling third in that National Hunt Chase that year. I think only was it 3 or 4 finished.
Yeah, it's 4 finished. He was
He's
well
50
beaten
lengths.
though.
Yeah, it's 50 lengths behind the others. So he's yet to prove himself on a track like Cheltenham, and he does jump right-handed, or at least he did so the last day. So he's one of those horses you think there's a big race in him, but I wonder if he's just going to be one of those we think that every time he's out and he trades unjustably short all the time, and eventually people just give up on him because he's going to be one of those nearly horses. So at the moment, I'd leave him alone for those festival handicaps. He's been well found in the markets anyway.
Was a serious performance from the winner as well. Didn't see another rival pretty much the whole way around. Very game all the way to the line, and they're looking at now possibly stepping into graded company. I was reading just before the off, so that'll be an interesting one. On the topic of performances of the weekend, we just want to talk about some of the interesting runners that we've had. It was quite an informative weekend. I'll kick things off with one horse, a very obvious one in Roxana. I imagine they'll be going to Aintree after this, although it hasn't completely confirmed. Whether they go for the Aintree hurdle or the Ryanair hurdle, I'm not so sure. I'd lean towards the Ryanair hurdle. She was just touched off in that race a couple of years ago, and I think she's probably a better horse now. Who was your sort of eye catcher from the weekend, Dan?
Just on Roxana, I think after the race they were a bit coy about going to Cheltenham. Said maybe they'd skip to Aintree, but I think in the subsequent days maybe they did come out and say Cheltenham's 100% on the agenda. It's just whether it's the mares or the stayers. So I think she'll go to Cheltenham then Aintree. I'm going to be a bit different. I'm going to give you a horse that was meant to run but didn't. I think it was on that Navan card on the Sunday. It was obviously called off, unfortunately. It's Riviere de Tel for Gordon Elliott, a useful juvenile for Gordon Elliott, who has such a strong hand in that division. She was second in the listed hurdle in France before going over to Gordon, and she bolted up on her first start for the yard over the Christmas period, looking really impressive. And she was due to run it in a rated novice hurdle against some of her elders, getting all the allowances for age and indeed because she's a filly. That would have been an interesting race for her to see how she goes against her elders. And it was also one of those rated novice hurdles where a decent-ish performance probably wouldn't give her a massive mark. Like, she'd probably be somewhat protected. She's one I have my eye on, especially for the Fred Winter. I think she's a very nice type. Gordon Elliott loves that race. That meeting's been rearranged to Friday, I believe, of this week. So it'll be interesting to see if she goes for the same race. And she's very much one I've got my eye on for the Fred Winter, especially because the same connections have Zanna here for the Triumph. So she's one to look forward to this week.
That'll be an informative card because they've got the 2.5 mile, haven't they, there as well? So that'll be Allaho, an easy game. So possibly some Ryanair clues there. I do have one that didn't go completely under the radar, but ran at Taunton on the weekend. And I would say that Brewing Up a Storm is a horse to keep an eye on back over hurdles. He never really was able to jump a fence. He just clattered through them and he fell in last year's Arkle. It was a class 2 and he's off top weight and he strolled in by about 11 lengths. He actually had some really good hurdling form as a novice. On his second start, he finished 4 lengths behind Champ. He then finished 4th in a Ballymore and 2nd in a Mersey novice hurdle at Aintree. He's got some good graded form there. I imagine they'll step up to 2.5 miles. If they were really ambitious, they could go for the Aintree hurdle, but he did only get a £7 rise, so there's definitely a possibility for a handicap in him. The last question we have time for is the most opposable favourite for the festival, and that comes from Rob James. Who would be the most opposable favourite for you?
It's a tough one. I took it away the handicaps because I think you could just go mad on them about favourites, the cuttable false favourites at this stage. I mean, having written a fair few previews now, I think some will know I'm writing a lot of previews at the moment for Cheltenham. I think a lot of the favourites are quite solid. I could have plugged it more. I could have given the website, my Twitter, and more. But I leave that out. I respect your show too much for those to make it into an advertisement for myself. But I think a lot of the favourites are quite solid, to be honest. The one whose position was quite solid, but maybe not so much anymore, is Galvin in the National Hunt Chase. Now, on the surface, he has great credentials. He's very experienced. He has solid Cheltenham form when second in the novice handicap behind Imperial Aura. And this was outlined as a target after he ran at Cheltenham earlier in the season. Like, he's going to be kept for this race, with Gordon Elliott thinking he's a Forest Stayer. But the emergence of Royal Pagaille now, I think in the non-run no bet market, he's now favourite. I think he's 5-2 non-run no bet. You've got the likes of Latest Exhibition, Pencilfoot of Lead, Secret Reprieve, all maybes at this stage for that race. And I think his place at the market was there because he's solid. But I think there's certain top class performers that might end up diverting from the RSA, or in Royal Pagaille's case, the Gold Cup, and might go for the National Hunt Chase instead. And if one or two of them turn up, his position at the head of the market is very tenuous.
I've got two. I do have one, a handicap, who I'd like to really take on. But for the
Oh,
same reason that you said, I wanted to give you guys another alternative as well. So the first one would be Sky Pirate for the Grand Annual. Mentioned last week, really keen to take this horse on short enough in the market. And now it looks like they're even going to try and go and utilize that low hurdling mark he's got. So there's a chance he might not even run in the Grand Annual, but I'd be definitely going to take him on. And the other one is Concertista for the Mares Hurdle. Do not like the horse at all. Haven't really warmed to it. Don't think the form is up to that much this year. And I would even have Roxana finish ahead of her in the Mares Hurdle, who I don't think will win the Mares Hurdle or the Stayers, whichever way they go for the record. So time for the selections. I'm going to kick things off this week. I'm going to be going to the Ultima Handicap. This horse will absolutely break your hearts, but it's just too big of a price at this point. He's only managed 2 wins in 18 starts, but his form at the festival is really good. He's got a second in the Martin Pipe. He finished second to LeBroy in the National Hunt Chase before going off joint favourite for this race last year and finishing third. Dan, I'm sure you know who this horse is.
Oh, my old friend Discorama, is it? Yes,
It is.
he's
Yes.
Oh, bless him.
25-1 each way. He is 14-1 with non-runner no bet, but I'm pretty sure this will be the target. He's just really consistent at the festival. I think the races do really suit him. He sits out the back and picks them off from a strong pace. He has a really good record off a break of 100 days or more with form reading 1-1-2-2. And it looks like he'll be getting that because he hasn't run since December now. I think it's December. His 2 seconds at Cheltenham did come after a run, but his third in last season's came for a 75-day layoff. So, as I say, he's more than capable of coming in off the back of a break. He ran a really solid race first time out this season, finishing second by a short head to Milan Native. The race most probably wouldn't have suited. It was only a free runner race. They then ran him in a trial meeting. I think it was the December meeting, sorry. And about 5 or so fences in, Robbie Power took the lead. And I don't know why he did that. This horse has never ran like that and is always a hold-up horse. I'm willing to scratch that run. I look at the horses near the top of the market and it looks littered with non-runners. You've got Dicky Diver there. He has options. Dash or Drasher. They're looking, as I said, for a graded race. And obviously a Royal Pagai, he's got bigger fish to fry. You know what you're going to get with this horse. He's most probably going to bump into one. But he's running in off, it'd be about the same mark. He's only £1 higher at this current point. He might just bump into one, but at each way 25-1, I think it's a pretty solid bet. You're going to tell me that, yeah, I see the angle, but the horse is a dog. That's what you're going to say.
Roughly.
Loosely translated.
He's a heartbreaker, isn't he?
Yeah.
That Ultima last year, I put him up Ante-post for that. I think at 20s, he went off 11-2. The Ultima thing is the Ultima. You need to be kind of handy in that race to have much of a chance. I think the first, second, and fourth that day were all up with a pace throughout. Brian Cooper rode Discorama cold out the back, not how you want to win an Ultima, and he was staying on the way to the line. So yeah, that was a frustrating one. But that run at November in the Cheltenham last day, that was what was that?
Awful.
I mean, I think as some people would say, he was the Twitter horse, wasn't he, at the time? And he absolutely performed like a Twitter horse because he was woeful. I think he's run out of chances for me personally. I mean, he's solid place festival form. I get that. This is going to be the race he probably runs in if he's going to run anywhere at the festival. It's the race for him, but I'm not sure. Maybe they go Irish National this year. Maybe they probably thought he was a Grand National horse. Maybe in the long term, I don't know if they're still thinking that. I haven't read anything about him in their targets, but it'll be interesting to see where he goes. Yeah, you can see him in the shake-up, definitely. He needs to bounce back from that last run because that was quite bad. But he's one of those where my patience probably just ran out of him last time. But
I'm hoping everyone hops off him, and that means that he will then ultimately go and win, and there'll just be me waving the Discorama flag still. That is the main hope.
You're so selfish.
Yes. All right, who's your selection going to be this week?
Yeah, so mine was quite frustrating, really. I had my eyes on a couple of handicaps, the Ultima included. Riviere de Tel was one I was looking at for the Fred Winter, as mentioned earlier. But various reasons meant none of those bets came to pass. So instead, I've looked at a race, isn't one I'd normally look at this stage because I tend to try and look at weak favourites. And the Stayers Hurdle is not a race you'd really say is week at the head of affairs. Obviously, you've got Paisley Park versus Time Hill round 3 to look forward to. Roxana was very impressive at the weekend. Cider Burley, Benny the Jew, maybe, who knows. But for me, Fury Road now is a silly price at 20-1. It's just too big, and I think that he's a bet at that price. Obviously, he was a top-class staying novice hurdle last season. He won a Grade 3, won a Grade 2, and then was a narrow third in that Albert Bartlett, which we know has been working out very, very well. Obviously, Monkfish and latest exhibition finishing narrowly ahead of him that day, and you had Tyne Hill a length back in 4th. I think some commented at the time that maybe Time Hill was the unlucky horse in that race, but we watched it back a few times. I'm not so sure. Like, while he did have to come wide into the bend, like, he had a chance. He jumped the second last near enough level with the leaders. Like, he held every chance that day. Whereas Fury Road was back in 10th when they jumped the second last behind Monkfish and latest exhibition. They were almost forming a single file queue with Fury Road at the back of it. And he did end up actually taking up the lead at one stage, and just to be pegged back narrowly by his 2 Irish rivals late on. And like that run was, I mean, top class. So he came into this season somewhat surprisingly staying over hurdles. Made a winning reappearance at Punchestown, winning a Grade 2. He didn't beat much that day. He was 4-11, but he did what he had to do and never really looked like losing. And then he was 4th in the Christmas hurdle over the Christmas period, which is the reason he's such a big price now. It wasn't a great run, let's be honest, but he was very well back that day. Like, he was about 5-2 the day before. He went off going, I think, 13-8 favourite. He usurped Cider Burley at the head of that market that day, and there's seemingly only one horse people wanted to be on, and that was Fury Road at the time. And for all that his run was disappointing, I think I've listed 4 reasons why I'm prepared to forgive it. First one, and no disrespect to Sean Flanagan, but he had to take over last second after Jack Candy was, I think, he had a fall earlier in the card and couldn't quite make it back for Fury Road. And he strikes me as a bit of a horse that needs a bit of knowing, if you understand. There is just, like, Delta work in a way. You feel he's always going to be better with the likes of Jack Kennedy on board because he takes a bit of understanding. And Sean being in the saddle probably didn't help that. I think with Jack or Davy Russell back in the saddle, that'll be a big help to him. It was a slowly run race. He got caught in a pocket round the bend. Obviously, that on I think Cider Burley came up round his outside and he got pinned in against the rail when had nowhere to go. But that didn't stop him from winning. At the end of the day, he wasn't good enough on the day, but that certainly didn't help. Gordon Elliott as well. I think it was quite well accepted that he had a few disappointments on that Christmas period, and perhaps his horses weren't firing as the likes of Willie Mullins were. So again, that's something to consider. But the main reason being, Fury Road just doesn't like Leopardstown at all. Like, his form there reads 5-4-4. He was well beaten in a bumper. He was disappointing in a Grade 1 novice hurdle last season before then running a Stormer in the Albert Bartlett. He bounced back last term from a poor run there. I just think that course doesn't suit him at all. And with all that in mind, I think there's plenty of reasons to forgive that run. And I also find it interesting as well that he was kept over hurdles this season, especially with Gordon knowing that he was going to have Cider Burley for this division. As a Gigginstown horse especially, you'd expect him to have gone over the fences for a novice chase campaign. And they don't exactly seem heavy with their novice chasers at the top end of the table. So it's interesting that they kept him over the smaller obstacles, and perhaps Gordon Elliott thought that he was a horse that could go to war in the open division in over hurdles. And I just think as well, with that in mind, with him having Cider Burley and also the market move on the day of the Christmas hurdle, I just think there's a suspicion that Fury Road's the better horse as opposed to Cider Burley. I think they can almost see Fury Road and Cider Burley swapping places in the market come the day. I just think he might be the classier horse in general. Somewhat surprisingly, Fury Road isn't in the Galmoy that runs this week, but I think he'll go to the Boyne Hurdle as a preparation at the back end of February. It still leaves him with about 28 days until the Stayers Hurdle, so plenty of time to get over it. And Gordon Elliott has won the last 4 renewals of the Boyne Hurdle, so it seems a logical stepping stone. And as a 7-year-old, he has more scope for improvement than most. 6 and 7-year-olds have won 23 of the last 30 renewals of the Stayers Hurdle, and the last 4 are all 7-year-olds, while Penhill and Listigar Oscar both ran in the Albert Bartlett the season before going on to win the Stayers. So the trends in that sense and his somewhat lightly raced profile both lead to encouragement. And I just think Cheltenham's going to suit him much better. It's going to be a more strongly run race. It's a track that suits him well. That long straight is going to really help him. And I just think he's way too big of a price at 20-1 now, especially if you consider that form with Time Hill from the Albert Bartlett. Finished ahead of him that day, and he's 5 times the price. For all that he perhaps hasn't impressed as much this season, I think there's plenty left in him. I think he can still go on to be a Grade 1 performer in this division. And yeah, as I say, 20-1 just seems massive to me.
I absolutely, in a weird way, I absolutely agree with you. I was quite keen to take on Fury Road when he ran at Leopardstown, not only for the track, but I was also quite keen on Cider Burleys. And there was only a couple of lengths that actually split them on the day. And you could definitely argue that Cider Burleys had an easier run round than Fury Road did. I'm looking at the odds here, and Cider Burleys is half the price of Fury Road. It makes no sense to me at all. You make a really good point as well. I think the track of Cheltenham will really suit. And also Florian Porter absolutely stole that race at Leopardstown, because it looked like it was going really fast out in front. But in reality, it was a very, really slowly run race, and was able to nick a very soft lead and kick from the bend. Yeah, no, really good selection, Daniel. I applaud that, mate.
Oh, thank you very much, mate. Yeah, it's not my usual one. I think people expect more handicaps, and maybe the week following and then going into it, it'll probably be a bit more. But at the moment, I think just too many of the markets are a bit of a mess. And for all, I think some of the favourites, indeed most of them for the grade races, are fairly solid. And I wouldn't be in a massive hurry to lay Tyne Hill or Paisley Park at their odds. But there's no way in my mind that Tyne Hill should be 7-2 and Fury Road should be 20-1. It just seems wrong. And that's, I think in those markets like that, you just kind of have to take those prices. I can see him easily going off single figures on the day. Providing, I wouldn't even mind if he went there fresh, but providing a smooth prep in the Boyne Hurdle, I think he's a single figure chance. He got well backed on the day for the Albert Bartlett after a disappointing run at Leopardstown. So I can see the same happening.
Easily halved in price of a good run, as you say, if it runs, that is. That will wrap up this week's Cheltenham head-to-head videos. As always, make sure to drop comments down below, because we would like to answer your questions before we go into our selections. Other than that, we do hope you enjoy the video, and we'll be back next week for another episode.